Even if you live for 1,000 years, you're gonna miss almost everything. That's just a fact of life. But your life will be all the better if you make time for these unforgettable movies.
Pop some popcorn, sharpen your katana, and come with us as we comb through the good, the bad, and the completely inexplicable to bring you the best ninja movies you must see before you die. If you're looking for a place to jump on with ninja movies, there aren't a lot of better starting points than 1979's Heroes of the East. Also known as Shaolin vs. Ninja, it follows the time-tested formula of pitting a master of one style against a group of rivals to see whose kung fu reigns supreme. In this case, that master is the legendary Gordon Liu, who was fresh off his breakthrough performance as the hero of 36th Chamber of Shaolin, and would go on to international fame as Pai Mei in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill. Any conversation about classic martial arts movies usually leads to one of the most widely accepted truisms of the genre: 5 deadly venoms rules hard. The 1982 follow-up, 5 Element Ninjas, combines everything good about that cult film and takes it about 5 steps further over the top. While it's not as well known as its predecessor, 5 Element Ninjas is every bit the blood-soaked classic that Venoms is. The plot is pretty simple. A kung fu school that was defeated in battle hires a color-coded, element-themed ninja clan to get revenge on the warriors that beat them. But honestly, that hardly matters when you're getting glorious fight scenes with ninjas appearing and disappearing in a cloud of red smoke, or watching the heroes celebrate tearing their enemies in half by punching a giant boulder so hard that it explodes. If you want to see the 80s ninja explosion in all of its bizarre high-concept glory, you need to go straight to the third entry in the infamous Cannon Films Ninja Trilogy. That's not to say Enter the Ninja and Revenge of the Ninja aren't worth seeing, because they definitely are.
Now, wait, Ninja, wait. Why don't we speak like civilized men?
But the first two aren't necessary to enjoy Ninja 3, The Domination. After the opening that finds a ninja launching a wildly violent assassination attempt on a golf course, the mysterious warrior ends up dead. But not before his soul possesses an aerobics instructor who suddenly finds herself unwillingly moonlighting as a deadly assassin. It's a twist on the usual ninja movie setup that combines martial arts action with the setup of a horror movie, and the end result is pure 80s madness. If you're only going to watch one of Cannon's American ninja films, and let's be real here, you should definitely only watch one. The second installment is by far the best. Michael Dudikoff returns as an army ranger named Joe Armstrong, who's investigating the disappearances of a handful of Marines from a military base in a Caribbean paradise with his sidekick, Curtis Jackson. It turns out those abducted jarheads are being brainwashed and genetically altered into an army of super ninjas, which means Armstrong and Jackson have to ninja their way through an entire base of brainwashed bad guys to blow up the entire operation. It's goofy, full of bloodless knockouts and over-the-top twists, but all of that adds up to a movie that's uproariously entertaining. Just make sure you don't follow it up with the incomprehensible American Ninja 3 Blood Hunt. On one level, Pray for Death is basically just Death Wish with Charles Bronson swapped out for Sho Kosugi. Look a little deeper though, and there's something in here that's a little bit smarter than your average ninja revenge story. Make no mistake, there is a lot of ninja revenge in this movie, with Kosugi playing the role of Akira, a highly trained ninja who leaves his life of violence behind in order to travel to America with his family and open a restaurant. Like pretty much all of Kosugi's ninja films, the action is spectacular, but the really compelling stuff here comes in how the movie presents Akira as an immigrant in pursuit of a peaceful new life in America, and the contrast between the dream of success and the barriers he encounters along the way. On the off chance that you were worried Sho Kosugi had stopped being a total badass after the 80s, don't fret. In 2009, his starring role as the villain of Ninja Assassin proved that he definitely still had it. Produced by the Wachowskis and directed by James McTeague, Ninja Assassin cast Kosugi as Lord Ozunu, the ruthless head of a ninja clan that trains orphans from birth to become killer ninjas. Unfortunately for Ozunu, his chosen successor, Raizo, goes renegade, setting the stage for exactly the kind of beautiful, visually stunning fight scenes that you'd expect from people who brought you The Matrix. If you only ever watch one Chuck Norris movie in your life, well, it should be Lone Wolf McQuade, if only because Chuck Norris drives a pickup truck out of his own grave. If you want to go with one with ninjas, however, you gotta go for the Octagon. Despite the lack of truck-based resurrection, it's basically a perfect storm of a Chuck Norris movie. Norris stars as Scott James, who finds himself caught up in a terrorist plot. Since he just happens to be pals with a couple of mercenaries who are also dealing with a severe ninja problem, the whole thing climaxes in a sequence where Scott James has to fight his way through the ninja's own lair, the Octagon. Director Ryuhei Kitamura is probably best known for his work on Godzilla Final Wars. But if you really want to see Kitamura take on hyper-violent widespread destruction, you need to sit down and watch Azumi. Based on the manga of the same name, Azumi offers incredibly stylish action, with practical effects enhanced by CGI that only rarely ends up feeling silly. And there's a twist at the end that's truly delightful for fans of ninja action. Takashi Miike's career as a director has been all over the map, but the one thing that unites all of his films is a style that verges on the surreal, creating movies that are often less about the narrative and more about the experience. That's the case with Iso, which follows a 19th century assassin through the afterlife, punctuating violent encounters with big questions about the nature of suffering. It's certainly not the fun martial arts romp that you'll get with other films, but it's definitely fascinating and worth a watch for the ninja obsessed. Made with a minuscule budget in 1987 by amateur filmmaker, martial artist, and Dragon Sound rhythm guitarist YK Kim, Miami Connection received incredibly poor reviews on its initial release, but became an instant cult classic after it was unearthed by the Alamo Drafthouse in 2012. It's easy to see why, too. The tortured drama, energetic amateur acting, and spectacularly weird plot of a synth-pop band of martial artists throwing down against a bunch of cocaine-dealing ninja bikers all add up to an incredible amount of weird charm that more than makes up for what this movie lacks in technique. Watch it, or suffer the wrath of this guy.
CGI spokesmodels hawk housewares, Indiana Jones meets Mad Max in space, and an accidental phone call warns of nuclear war. Or does it? You won't want to miss these 80s sci-fi gems. Between his time playing Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars trilogy and the sequel trilogy, Mark Hamill's most high-profile role was voicing the Joker for various Batman TV shows and video games. But the actor continued to appear in live-action movies throughout the decades, including another sci-fi film released in the 80s, albeit one that didn't take place a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. A small but fervent fanbase sings the praises of 1989's Slipstream, the story of a near-future Earth that has been left a barren wasteland due to pollution and natural disasters, where bounty hunters battle the police for the right to bring criminals to justice.
Poison jar. Now drop the gun and we'll talk about getting you the antidote.
I never believe a man staring down the barrel of a gun.
Hamill once described Slipstream on Twitter as, quote, one of my favorite movies that most people have never seen. If the recommendation of Hamill and his Twitter followers doesn't convince you to check out this underappreciated film, how about the fact that it also stars Bill Paxton, F. Murray Abraham, and Ben Kingsley, and was directed by Tron director Steven Lisberger. 1980's Battle Beyond the Stars is well worth tracking down for fans of sci-fi just by virtue of the names behind it. For starters, it's one of the first films to be written by future Oscar nominee John Sayles. It was only the second movie to be scored by the late James Horner, an Oscar-winning composer whose work includes Aliens, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, and Avatar. And the art direction and special effects featured a rising talent by the name of James Cameron, who soon built an entire career out of reinventing the sci-fi genre several times over. Impressive pedigree aside, Battle Beyond the Stars is an ambitious sci-fi fantasy adventure about space cowboys, barbarian armies, and alien clones that both calls back to the campy adventures of the 50s and 60s and also hints at the future of the genre. It was produced by Roger Corman and feels very much like a movie that was produced by Roger Corman. But he is called the King of Cult for a reason. He definitely has a knack for creating, or at least attaching himself to movies that are often written off when they're first released, but are much more appreciated when looked back on years later. The new wave/post-punk aesthetic of the 1980s that was most prominent in music, fashion, and hair salons also found itself a compelling bedfellow in sci-fi. This was most prominently illustrated in Blade Runner, the movie that informed the cyberpunk subgenre of sci-fi for decades to come. But another pioneering cyberpunk film was also released that same year, called Liquid Sky. Unfortunate timing, as it was all but guaranteed to be completely swallowed up by Ridley Scott's masterpiece. Still images of Liquid Sky look like an early MTV music video, from the era when bands like Duran Duran, The Human League, and The Cure were in heavy rotation. Sure enough, the movie starts during a new wave fashion show, and among the first characters introduced are rival models Jimmy and Margaret, a dual role played by actor and performance artist Anna Carlisle. It should be noted that Liquid Sky is a very adult movie, and doesn't tread lightly in its depiction of a drug and sex-fueled Manhattan that soon finds itself under the influence of a dangerous extraterrestrial being.
Are you afraid?
But if it seems like a movie you can handle, and you're a fan of Blade Runner and the pop culture zeitgeist it was tapping into, you should definitely seek out Liquid Sky. Few actors ever have a year like Charlie Sheen did in 1986. Especially when they're only 21 years old. That was the year that he added Platoon, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, Lucas, and a little indie sci-fi movie called The Wraith to his growing filmography. He was only the top-billed star in the last one, but unfortunately it's the least remembered of the four. In The Wraith, Sheen plays the titular character, who is both the ghost of a murdered teen and a different kid who's new to town. Sound confusing? Not only would explaining further ruin the movie, but it also doesn't do the admittedly convoluted plot any favors trying to boil it down to a single sentence. Convoluted isn't necessarily bad though, and The Wraith does tell a pretty interesting story with a few surprising twists. But the biggest reason to check it out is that it presents one of the coolest and most underrated anti-heroes of that era's sci-fi. Not to mention that every scene of the movie absolutely drips with mid-1980s cool. Especially the awesome version of a Dodge M4S Turbo Interceptor that the Wraith uses as both transportation and weapon. Intentionally campy movies tend to rise and fall in popularity as time goes on, but companies like Troma Entertainment and filmmakers like John Carpenter certainly helped to make the 1980s one of the best eras of all time for camp. Campiness, sci-fi, and horror intersected together wonderfully and hilariously in the 1984 extraterrestrial zombie invasion romp Night of the Comet. Starring Catherine Mary Stewart of Flight of the Navigator, Kelly Maroney of Chopping Mall, and future Star Trek Voyager commander Robert Beltram, the cast members of Night of the Comet are all great choices for the various genres the movie is attempting. The story sees the aftermath of a comet that has vaporized much of the population, leaving only a small number of survivors to contend with the zombies that the comet also inexplicably unleashed.
There's nobody! There's nobody!
Arguably, the film's most important pop culture achievement is that it inspired Joss Whedon in part to create the character of Buffy Summers, and it's always worth going back to see the source material for later beloved characters and franchises. Plus, for what it's worth, Night of the Comet is a much better film than the original Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Michael Crichton doesn't always get the credit he deserves for how important and genre-defying of a sci-fi writer he was. In addition to Jurassic Park, Crichton also wrote the novels The Andromeda Strain, Timeline, Congo, and Sphere. And though not all of them got stellar screen adaptations, it doesn't detract from what an ever-present force he was on both the page and the screen over multiple decades. Crichton sometimes bypassed writing a book altogether, instead writing a story directly for the screen, as he did with his criminally overlooked 1981 film Looker. The sci-fi movie satirizes the control that the media has over people, and in particular, how much influence physical attractiveness can wield. Looker also predicted the mainstream popularity of plastic surgery, as well as the fairly recent phenomenon of computer-generated celebrities and spokespeople.
Hi, I'm Cindy. I'm the perfect female type, 18 to 24. I'm here to self-reading.
In addition, Looker is underappreciated for the way it pioneered the use of computer effects and images in films, having the first true CGI character ever used in a movie, as well as using 3D computer shading before Tron did, even though Tron often erroneously gets the credit for doing that first. The movie that the Ice Pirates was most frequently compared to upon its release was Star Wars, and that is certainly valid. But the movie also draws inspiration from Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica, Mad Max, and Indiana Jones. It's the kind of movie that both pokes fun at science fiction and the other movies from the genre, while also demonstrating a love and reverence for them. Also featuring early appearances by Ron Perlman and Angelica Houston, the Ice Pirates stars Robert Urich as Jason, who leads the pirates on various intergalactic missions. While silliness is definitely the order of the day, there is a character called the Pimp Robot, for example, the Ice Pirate still takes itself seriously as a production and feels like it had ambitions of being the start of an ongoing franchise. Poor reviews and an underwhelming box office take ensured that those plans didn't come to pass, which is too bad, as it seems like further Ice Pirates movies could have really been something special with a fully formed narrative universe. As it stands, it's a fun little one-off that was among the first to do what earned later productions like Red Dwarf, Spaceballs, Mars Attacks, and Galaxy Quest a lot more attention and recognition. The vast majority of the movies on this list got fairly lukewarm reviews at best, and have needed retrospective analysis and a cult following to get their due. Miracle Mile, on the other hand, was pretty strongly praised right from the start, and shouldn't have had to be relegated to the dustbin of cinematic history. But audiences just didn't show up for it, and for one reason or another, it never got that push that VHS rentals and years of TV reruns did for so many of its peers. The premise of the movie, the entirety of which takes place almost in real time within a single night, is that the world has been whipped up into a frenzied panic over an impending nuclear war that will leave Earth a post-apocalyptic wasteland. The twist is that said war might not even be coming, and all of the hysteria surrounding it might not be based on any credible information whatsoever. Indeed, Miracle Mile might have felt current at the time given its proximity to the Cold War and other geopolitical fears of that generation, but it has a renewed prescience thanks to similar panics resulting from questionable news sources. Bonus points for the gorgeous score by Tangerine Dream, and what is arguably a career-best performance from Anthony Edwards. Though it was a huge hit in Japan and was, at the time, the most expensive movie ever produced in the country, Fukatsu no Hai, which translates to Day of Resurrection, never got the chance to become the Western crossover success that it could have been. Though a rough cut was screened at the 1980 Cannes Film Festival under the title Virus, it didn't get much attention, due in no small part having to contend with Akira Kurosawa's Kagemusha being the toast of the festival that year. It got a VHS release a few years later, but with little fanfare since nobody really knew anything about it. This was surprising considering its international cast that included George Kennedy, Olivia Hussey, and Robert Vaughn, as well as Japanese actor Sonny Chiba, who was fairly well known to American audiences at the time. But American sci-fi fans should rectify this immediately, as Virus is an excellent film that, by all rights, deserves to have had 2 or 3 sequels or remakes by this point. Virus tells the story of a man-made virus that is inadvertently released and subsequently causes a massive pandemic, resulting in riots and widespread civil unrest.
If I were to open this ampule to the air, you would be dead within 3 days.
Fans of more well-known pandemic sci-fi movies like Outbreak, Contagion, 12 Monkeys, and Quarantine should go back and check out Virus. French filmmaker Luc Besson is known to sci-fi fans as a writer and director of both 1997's genre-defining The Fifth Element and 2017's more underrated Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets. It turns out that he actually has a third sci-fi movie in his filmography that many people believe to be an overlooked gem, and it was actually his directorial debut. Released in 1983 in his native France, Le Dernier Combat or The Last Battle can easily be enjoyed by anyone, whether they know French or not, as the movie is almost entirely devoid of dialogue. But it's not just some artsy gimmick, as the story of the film is about a post-apocalyptic world where humanity has lost the ability to speak. As such, the characters don't have names, they are simply referred to with labels such as man, brute, and so on. From his very first movie, Besson was already an extremely innovative and self-assured filmmaker, and Le Dernier Combat has aged much better than most film debuts. It's not at all hard to see why he went on to create multiple hidden gem sci-fi movies over the decades.
Cinematic samurai are known for their fierce loyalty, deadly precision with the sword, and an unswerving commitment to a code of honor. From Japanese classics to American takes, these are the samurai movies you absolutely need to watch before you die. The name that rightly dominates any discussion of great samurai movies is Akira Kurosawa. The late Japanese director made some of the best samurai movies ever, and he's generally regarded as one of the most influential filmmakers of all time.
I think he comes from a generation of filmmakers that were still influenced by silent films.
The film most often associated with Kurosawa is 1954's Seven Samurai. The heroes of this epic film are ronin, which are samurai without masters. The 7 warriors unite to protect a farming community from merciless bandits. They also train the villagers into a makeshift militia, and the whole thing culminates in a huge, bloody battle. If the plot of Seven Samurai sounds familiar, that's because it's been copied over and over again. The classic western, The Magnificent Seven, is a remake of Seven Samurai, and plenty of other westerns have found similar inspiration. The story of veteran heroes training peaceful townsfolk into soldiers has been copied in everything from comedies like Three Amigos to episodes of shows like The Clone Wars and The Mandalorian. And the trope of assembling a team has echoes in heist films like Ocean's 11, war movies like The Dirty Dozen, and superhero flicks like The Avengers. Basically, if you love movies, then you've almost definitely seen something influenced by Kurosawa. If you're a fan of westerns, you're likely familiar with 1992's Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood's Oscar-winning film about an aging gunslinger who sets out on one last job.
I'll see you in hell, William Money.
But what you may not know is that Korean director Lee Sang-il remade Unforgiven in 2013 with Japanese actor Ken Watanabe as retired samurai Jubei. Set in Japan's Hokkaido frontier, the plot of 2013's Unforgiven hews pretty closely to the originals. Jubei and his old friend Kingo are lured out of retirement by the promise of a handsome reward for killing two brothers who have disfigured a sex worker. They're joined by the younger Goro, who makes bold claims about a triumphant and violent past. The trio clash with the local lawman, who's determined to stop anyone looking to make good on the sex worker's contract. This is clearly destined to end badly for everyone involved. Unforgiven is a visually rich, morally challenging epic. It's a faithful echo of its source material, with the added benefit of Watanabe's singular talent. 2002's The Twilight Samurai is a different kind of samurai movie. Its hero, Seibei Iguchi, is a low-level, poor samurai who works as a clerk. His wife dies early in the film, leaving him to raise his two daughters alone on a modest stipend. When his old friend Tomoe begins to regularly visit him and help take care of the girls, Seibei falls in love. Sadly, though, he is ashamed of his social status and initially refuses to marry his old friend. While The Twilight Samurai has its share of swordplay, neither action nor adventure is the focus of the film. It's more interested in character than other typical elements of the genre, and as such, Seibei is a lot more relatable than your average fictional samurai. Most samurai movie fans probably don't deal with a lot of far-reaching adventures involving assassination and revenge in their own lives. But things like loss, love, and the difficult balance between work and family are much more universal concepts. The Twilight Samurai is a refreshing and uncharacteristically upbeat samurai film. And that distinction helped it earn 12 Japanese Academy Awards, along with an Oscar nomination for Best Foreign Language Film. In the wake of The Twilight Samurai's success in 2002, the doors opened for more filmmakers to dive back into the long-neglected genre. Among them was Takashi Miike, who earned praise for his 2010 remake of the 1963 classic 13 Assassins. Set in 1844, the story follows a group of samurai determined to take down a powerful and cruel lord whose rule could mean nothing but horror for the future of Japan. Despite its direct source material, 13 Assassins often feels a lot like 7 Samurai, including its length. At close to 2.5 hours, 13 Assassins begins relatively slowly, but climaxes with a spectacular and prolonged battle between the heroes and the villain's army. It's an epic set piece that includes an abandoned town converted into a deadly labyrinth of booby traps. The film is heralded as one of Miike's best, and it also went a long way to revitalize the dormant samurai genre. It was nominated for 10 Japanese Academy Awards and won 4 of them. And as Spectrum culture critic David Harris wrote, Miike has created a reverential and vital film in a genre that many may have thought as moribund and passé as its subject. The plays of William Shakespeare have remained relevant for centuries after they were first written. His works have been adapted into countless movies because they still speak to audiences today. Akira Kurosawa proved this better than anyone with 1957's Throne of Blood, his adaptation of Shakespeare's tragedy Macbeth. While Macbeth is set in Scotland, Throne of Blood takes place in Japan. But besides the setting change, the two stories are otherwise remarkably similar. Throne of Blood's protagonist is General Washizu, who at first seems as loyal to his lord as any samurai. After he's visited by a strange spirit who tells him that one day he'll become the Lord of Spider's Web Castle, he tells his wife Asaji about the prophecy. Just as Lady Macbeth did with her husband, Asaji urges her partner to make the spirit's prediction come true by killing the Lord and taking his place. After that, just like his Shakespearean inspiration, Washizu finds himself well past the point of no return and on a road that can only end with a bloodbath. Throne of Blood is not only essential for samurai fans, but for Shakespeare devotees as well. As The Guardian critic Derek Malcolm put it, it remains a landmark of visual strength and is possibly the finest Shakespearean adaptation ever committed to the screen.
This clever reimagination of a Shakespearean classic is always included among Kurosawa's best.
One of the most unique entries on this list is Jim Jarmusch's 1999 crime drama Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai. This one doesn't take place in Japan, and stranger still, we're not sure exactly where in America it's meant to be set, as no city name is ever provided within the film itself. Forrest Whitaker stars as the titular hitman who binds himself in service to local mobster Louis, after Louis saves his life. But Ghost Dog isn't just any old hitman. When he's not working, he tends to his pigeons, meditates, and studies Hagakure, a collection of conversations from the early 18th century about the meaning of the code of Bushido. Ghost Dog sees himself as a samurai and is a strict follower of Bushido.
I follow a code. I've always given you my respect.
The fact that Ghost Dog continues to work for Louis and eventually begins taking out his boss's competition when Louis's life is in danger is proof enough of his devotion to the code. Even after it becomes clear that Louis isn't returning Ghost Dog's loyalty, the hitman refuses to lift a hand against him. Ultimately, Ghost Dog: The Way of the Samurai is a uniquely moving and surprisingly funny film about a man who refuses to let go of who he is in the face of a hostile world. By the early 1960s, Japanese actor Toshiro Mifune had already starred in multiple Akira Kurosawa films. In 1961, the two of them teamed up once again for the first of a pair of films in which Mifune played impoverished samurai Sanjuro, a name that means 30 years old. Each movie would prove to be some of the best in the entire canon of the genre. When we first meet Sanjuro in Yojimbo, he's found himself in a town where a feud between two warring clans is raging. Rather than work for one clan or the other, he winds up getting hired by both sides as part of a secret plan that he hopes will wipe out both groups. In 1962, Mifune starred in the follow-up, Sanjuro, in which the title hero teams up with a group of samurai intent on fighting a corrupt lord. Some of the most influential aspects of Yojimbo and Sanjuro are felt in Western cinema. Yojimbo's anti-hero is credited as the prototype for the similarly amoral man with no name, as played by Clint Eastwood in Italian director Sergio Leone's spaghetti western Dollars trilogy. The similarities between these two characters aren't especially clear in the more comedic Sanjuro, but in the much darker Yojimbo, their shared characteristics are obvious enough for anyone to recognize. Kill Bill is a stylistically beautiful revenge epic and a story too big for a single film. It's also Quentin Tarantino's love letter to martial arts and samurai cinema. In 2003's Kill Bill Volume 1, Uma Thurman's merciless ex-assassin is known only as the Bride. When we first meet her, we have no idea why she's arrived at Vernita Green's suburban home in a garish yellow truck, or why the two women proceed to beat the crap out of each other.
You can take my word for it. Your mother had it coming.
Eventually, we learn that the bride left the employ of the enigmatic Bill to pursue a normal life. But at the rehearsal for her wedding, Bill found her, and he and his top assassins killed all of the guests and left the bride for dead. Miraculously, though, she survived and began her path of vengeance. The first film is heavier on action, particularly in the climax in the Japanese restaurant, the House of Blue Leaves. It's there that the bride has a darkly hilarious and visually stunning showdown against the sword-wielding crazy 88s. Kill Bill Volume 2 arrived into theaters just 1 year later. It dives deeper into the bride's background and the reasons for her war with Bill. The entire two-film saga is a wonderful cinematic achievement that all action movie fanatics should experience at least once. American audiences may not be familiar with the name Zatoichi, but in Japan, the fictional blind swordsman is eminently recognizable. Between 1962 and 1989, Japanese actor Shintaro Katsu starred as Zatoichi in 26 films, along with 100 episodes of the Zatoichi TV series that aired from 1974 to 1979. In 2003, Takeshi Kitano revitalized the hero with the blind swordsman Zatoichi, which he directed, wrote, and starred in as the legendary samurai character. In the film, Zatoichi is an otherwise peaceful swordsman who helps a pair of sisters in their quest to make criminals pay for killing their parents. The movie is a series of contradictions that shouldn't work together, but somehow they do. It's as bloody as a typical samurai film, while it also manages to be hilarious and often beautiful. Kitano's unique style makes these warring notes work perfectly, with big laughs and bigger stylized bloodletting. As Time Out critic Jeff Andrews put it, the blind swordsman Zatoichi is without doubt fast, funny, fabulous to behold. In many ways, 1965's Samurai Assassin is a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Its hero is Tsuruchio Niro, a ronin who knows he's the illegitimate son of a powerful nobleman. Desperate to be recognized as a true samurai, he joins a plot to assassinate a controversial lord. He hopes that this will earn his father's pride and encourage him to reveal himself. Based on an actual incident in Japanese history, Samurai Assassin can at times get bogged down with the exposition that provides historical context. But its payoff is a stunning, brutal battle in the snow at the end of the film, which makes the wait more than worth it. Fans of happy endings may want to skip Samurai Assassin, as it includes a surprise twist that makes everything that unfolds seem even starker and more senseless. Regardless, it's a captivating presentation of tragic historical events that eventually lead to the end of the samurai.
For decades, Hollywood has derived blockbuster drama from natural disasters, both real and imagined. From the all-star disaster movie classics of the 70s through the effects-driven spectacles of more recent decades. There's nothing quite like the thrill of watching things go horribly awry, from the comfort of your couch or local Cineplex. In the interest of saving you some time, since, as these films remind us, the clock is indeed ticking for us all, here's a look at some disaster films that simply can't be missed. 2006's Poseidon was a regrettable remake of 1972's The Poseidon Adventure, and should be ignored at all costs. However, the original, about a group of luxury liner passengers trapped in an upside-down vessel that's slowly but surely sinking, is well worth wading through. Anchored by Gene Hackman and Shelley Winters, the film presents a gripping look at what might happen to a group of well-off vacationers when a tidal wave capsizes their ship and leaves them scrambling for escape from a watery grave. Special effects have obviously evolved since then, but the patient pace and fully realized characters are increasingly rare among the modern crop of blockbuster action movies.
I started to believe in your promises that we had a chance.
Starring Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, Faye Dunaway, and Fred Astaire, The Towering Inferno was star-studded to say the least. The film centers on the blazing drama that spreads after the world's tallest building, the Glass Tower, goes up in flames after an electrical circuit goes haywire during the tower's dedication ceremony. The blaze leaves entire families trapped dozens of stories above the ground. And beneath the obvious appeal of the Towering Inferno survival story is a cutting commentary on corporate greed and the true cost of the bottom line. Inspired by a real-life Uruguayan rugby team who were stranded in the snow-capped Andes Mountains after their small plane crashed, Alive is a chillingly raw depiction of the group's efforts to survive the accident and the cruel climate where they were stranded. Based on Piers Paul Reed's written account, the movie spares no bitter details about what these athletes had to do to crawl through each day until rescue arrived. From the drawn-out suffering of gangrene and frostbite to their desperate decision to nourish themselves on the flesh of the fallen, the fact that it's based on a true story makes the cinematic experience that much more unsettling. The brawny action prowess of Sylvester Stallone in his prime and Rob Cohen's Daylight offered a spectacular foundation for Sly the Savior at his best. Stallone starred as a former EMS medic who puts himself in harm's way to help those who became trapped in New York's Holland Tunnel after a group of diamond thieves crash into a chemical waste truck, triggering an explosion. It all adds up to an action-packed race against time, and the Hudson River set in an eerie darkness. This pick might be best remembered for its giant storms and special effects, but Twister's superior acting and emotional subplots are what made the movie such a standout. Sure, the dialogue can get a little silly.
Cow. I gotta go, Julia. We got cows.
But for the most part, Twister does a terrific job of balancing human drama, like a dissolving marriage and a character's childhood trauma, against the effects-driven chaos audiences demand from a film about tornado chasers. It's still very easy to be swept up in, even decades later. Audiences had their pick of magma movies in 1997, with Dante's Peak and Volcano both erupting in quick succession at theaters. But whereas Volcano threatened the entire metropolitan area of Los Angeles, Dante's Peak benefited from a narrower focus, zooming in on a small town and letting viewers get to know and care about its characters. Additionally, Peak's hero relied on his scientific expertise, rather than sheer bravado. And while Volcano leans heavily on ordinary action movie conventions to carry the plot along, Dante's Peak offers some unsettling creative scenes of chaos that still hold up even now. Mimi Leader's Deep Impact was miles above Michael Bay's Armageddon. Rather than relying on a ridiculous action thriller fantasy of sending cowboy oil drillers into space, instead of actual astronauts, Deep Impact actually relied on the expertise of scientists, and it shows. More importantly, the movie wasn't just about showcasing the heroism of a few astronauts, but focused on the scattered impact and personal sacrifices that could result from impending doom in various parts of the world. There are still some efforts to thwart the rock from colliding with Earth, of course, but the most memorable moments are grounded in the smaller scale drama that holds the sci-fi action together. Plenty of disaster movies have used avalanches or tsunamis to fuel the action, but Raw Uthog's The Wave stands out due to its stunning cinematography and its main character's intensely affecting arc. Nothing about the movie is particularly groundbreaking, but its obedience to formula is easy to forgive thanks to Uthog's visual style and a screenplay that's driven as much by its relatable characters as it is by the titular catastrophe. The Indian Ocean tsunami of 2004 cost hundreds of thousands of human lives and leveled coastlines in over a dozen countries. Any movie that dared to dramatize this real-life disaster would have to deal with the story sensitively. And J.A. Bayona's The Impossible did just that. The film waded through the endless misery of the story to find a glimmering, albeit somewhat controversial, piece of hope in the Bellon family, who defied the odds and managed to survive the storm. As with all the best disaster movies, the viewing experience can be grueling, but it pays inspiring dividends. And as a bonus, check out The Young Spider-Man.
Westerns have been around for over a century, which means the genre is full of hits and misses. So how can you find the very best of the best? Well, we've got you covered, because these are some of the westerns you need to see before you die. Clint Eastwood and director Sergio Leone didn't invent the spaghetti western, but they pretty much perfected it with The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Leone's eye for beautiful shots and his ability to film brutal, intense action scenes, aided of course by Ennio Morricone's amazing musical score, makes this film stand out as a masterclass in creating a simple plot that means a great deal. Eastwood plays the man with no name, although he's referred to as Blondie throughout the film. He and two other gunslingers are searching for a lost stockpile of Confederate gold. Throughout the movie, they keep running into each other, gleaning more and more information about the whereabouts of their prize until they finally arrive at their destination. What follows is a three-way duel for all the marbles, with plenty of twists and intense stare-downs. Spaghetti westerns are a great demonstration of how a genre can adapt and evolve over time. If you like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, check out the other Eastwood-Leone team-ups, A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. All of these films are classics that deserve a lot of praise.
Bravo.
It's one of the best buddy westerns of all time. You can't go wrong with Robert Redford and Paul Newman in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. It's a movie where, almost from the get-go, you can tell that disaster is inevitable for our leading men. Regardless, it never gets old watching the two struggle with their attempts to escape the long-reaching arm of the law, all while cracking jokes and being undeniably cool. The story goes like this. Butch is the charismatic leader of a gang, and Sundance is his trusty lieutenant. After a score goes wrong, the two realize they need to escape from the mobilized lawmen who are after them. Their solution is to flee to South America, along with Sundance's girlfriend, where they'll be able to continue their crime spree unimpeded. It's a fairly bare-bones plot, but the star power of the two leads is magnetic. You really root for Butch and Sundance to figure things out and find the life they're searching for, and it seems like it just may happen, right up until it doesn't. The finale is a massive standoff against a literal army of soldiers, with a closing shot you'll have a hard time forgetting. The late 1980s and early 1990s saw a nice little revival for the Western genre, with films like Silverado and Dances with Wolves. However, one of the best of the bunch has to be 1993's Tombstone. It's a veritable who's who of some of the biggest actors of the time. You've got Val Kilmer, Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton, and Kurt Russell, among many others. It's also immensely quotable, mostly due to a career-defining performance from Kilmer as Doc Holliday, a movie sidekick who doesn't get nearly enough credit.
You're probably seeing double.
I have two guns, one for each of you.
At first glance, Tombstone reads an awful lot like a big dumb action movie, but the truth behind the film is actually pretty fascinating. Although it's obviously been dramatized, most of the events that take place in the movie really occurred in the town of Tombstone, Arizona. There's the shootout at the OK Corral, Wyatt Earp's miraculous stand at the Creek ambush, and the final ride to destroy the Cowboys. In fact, some of the most ridiculous aspects of the film are reportedly what truly happened. Some people might dismiss Tombstone as a pop western, but don't fall into that trap. Just because it stars a lot of popular 90s actors doesn't mean it's a lesser movie. Regarded by many as Sergio Leone's best spaghetti western, Once Upon a Time in the West does a brilliant job of matching impressive substance to Leone's well-known style. Clint Eastwood is nowhere to be found here, but we get the equally enigmatic gunslinger known only as Harmonica, played with steely intensity by Charles Bronson. It also features a masterstroke of casting against type. The normally lovable Henry Fonda chews scenery as the despicable outlaw Frank. Once Upon a Time in the West is an epic tale, clocking in at almost 3 hours and featuring a variety of interwoven plots that help ramp up the intensity and stakes as the film progresses. It culminates in a classic Western showdown between Harmonica and Frank, where it's finally revealed exactly why Harmonica is so hell-bent on taking down the outlaw. The movie's got the classic style you expect from Sergio Leone, alongside another timeless Ennio Morricone soundtrack. It also boasts 2 extremely impressive performances from Bronson and Fonda. So the next time someone claims that Westerns are just too simplistic, all you need to do is cue this one up. It would hardly be a list of must-see Westerns if John Wayne didn't show up once or twice, and The Searchers is regarded as one of his best. The Searchers is basically about a man named Ethan and his quest for revenge. At the beginning of the film, members of Ethan's family are murdered and others captured by a Comanche leader. Ethan and a group of men go looking for the captured girls. The movie makes a major point to focus on Ethan's thirst for vengeance at any cost rather than an actual desire to do the right thing. This is most clearly illustrated when he eventually finds his niece Debbie, who decides she'd prefer to stay with her captors and return with her uncle and brother. In retaliation, Ethan threatens to shoot her.
Stand aside, Martin.
No, you don't, Ethan.
If the goal of a Western is to provide a look at the war going on inside the human psyche, few films do it as well as The Searchers. The movie has influenced everyone from George Lucas to Martin Scorsese, who was inspired by the movie's plot when developing his classic film Taxi Driver starring Robert De Niro. The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford has many strengths, including its impressive cast. It generally plays as a quiet, character-driven drama, but it's punctuated by loud, violent acts that keep the plot rolling. Brad Pitt and Casey Affleck star, and it also features Sam Rockwell and Jeremy Renner. Sadly, this underrated film didn't perform very well at the box office, and that's a real tragedy because it's a genuine masterpiece. The film is based on a novel by Ron Hansen, and it follows James's gang and the events that eventually lead up to his killing. As the members of his gang start to grow distrustful and stab one another in the back, Jesse keeps searching for men he can trust and puts his faith in the wrong person. One of the best aspects of the film is how the aftermath of James's death is handled. Ford expects to receive a massive reward and gain celebrity status for doing the deed. Instead, he's reviled by anyone who knows, and the government never follows through with the bounty. The Assassination of Jesse James does as good a job as any Western of showing that the glamorized ideals of the Wild West fall far short of reality. It may not seem cutting-edge nowadays, but The Wild Bunch was a fairly revolutionary film in 1969, both for its cinematography and its subject matter. It was nominated for several awards across a variety of categories, earning accolades for its writing, cinematography, and direction. The film was also controversial, as the violence was extremely graphic for a mainstream film at the time. Plus, the main characters, for the most part, are inherently unlikable.
If they move, kill them.
Like many Westerns, The Wild Bunch focuses on a group of men trying to find their place in a changing world. It tells the story of a gang of aging outlaws who get entangled in several difficult conflicts as they try to stay alive and find their fortune. They wind up falling in with a Mexican general who they know they can't trust, but with options running low and the law closing in, they decide he's their best bet. The tension builds throughout the movie, rarely getting a chance to diffuse until the end when a massive firefight brings everything crashing down. The Wild Bunch stars Hollywood legends like William Holden and Ernest Borgnine, and it's a great reference point for the evolution from classic to modern Western. And seriously, that final shootout is one of the most epic movie gunfights of all time. Released in 1939, Stagecoach may seem a little simplistic compared to the plots of other legendary Westerns. However, it's a great way to see the roots of the genre and how it's evolved over the decades. It's also one of John Wayne's best roles, and we'd be remiss not to include it here. At its core, Stagecoach is a simple story of a group of very different people forced to share space and trust in one another. Almost every character in the film is an archetype: the sex worker with a heart of gold, the reformed outlaw, and the drunken doctor, to name just a few. But what makes Stagecoach work so well is how it throws these archetypes together in different situations and combinations. It isn't an overly action-packed film, it's more of a character drama that weaves a tale about the mythology of the Old West, highlighted here and there by wild chases and a few good shootouts. So if you want to experience a classic Western and see where the genre comes from, Stagecoach is an excellent choice. Many film fans consider High Noon to be the first true adult Western, one that examines the morals of the Old West and explores the psychology of the men and women living on the frontier. This 1952 movie also won several Academy Awards, including Best Actor for star Gary Cooper. As for the film itself, it's a tense, pared-down Western that explores the nature of duty and morality, all through one man's desperate attempts to stay alive. High Noon stars Cooper as Marshal Will Kane, a man who's getting married and is about to retire. But right as he's preparing to set out for a new life, he learns that an outlaw he put behind bars has been released and is coming to town to exact revenge. His new wife, played by Grace Kelly, tries to get him to leave, but he refuses to run. Instead, Kane tries to round up a group of men to help him fight. Unfortunately, he slowly learns that the town has turned against him, too cowardly to help and fearful that they'll only get themselves killed in the process. So Kane decides to make a solitary final stand at High Noon when his nemesis comes into town. Compared to modern westerns, High Noon may seem a bit slow, but it features some powerful and famous scenes, like an iconic crane shot showing how alone Kane really is. Whether you're a fan of westerns or not, this is a thoughtful and suspenseful film that everyone should see.
Sure, a lot of found footage horror films might leave you snoozing, but there are still a few gems worth watching. From obscure flicks to landmark films, these are the found footage horror movies that are actually good. In 2007, Jaume Balaguerro and Paco Plaza set out to make a horror film that would bring audiences further into the action than ever before. Balaguerro told IGN that their goal was to make their audience feel as though they were a part of the film itself, explaining, "We wanted to use the film screen in a way that is similar to the experience of playing video games." Rec does exactly that. Using a single camera, the film follows a reporter along a story that begins as a day-in-the-life expose of some firemen and ends with them trapped in an apartment building that gets quarantined by the government. As the night progresses, the reason for the quarantine becomes terrifyingly obvious. Rec doesn't hold back when it comes to scaring its audience. The film throws itself into horror almost immediately and stays there for the remainder of its 80-minute runtime. It's short, not so sweet, and to the point. It doesn't try to be anything other than a shocker, and in that regard, it completely succeeds. Barry Levinson isn't the first name that comes to mind when it comes to found footage horror films. In 2012, Levinson co-wrote and directed The Bay, a found footage film that is about as far from his usual repertoire as a film can get. The Bay documents a 4th of July incident in Claridge, Maryland that took the lives of 700 of its residents. Through webcams, phone videos, and recorded calls to emergency services, details emerge regarding the parasitic outbreak that affected everything in the Bay.
This is Dr. Williamson, communicable disease. You believe you may have a bacterial case?
Not one, 30.
What?
As far as found footage goes, the Bay has more production value than most. It looks and feels like the real deal, which is only amplified by a solid story with a legitimate social message and a cast that knows what they're doing. Essentially, the film is nowhere near amateur, and getting through the entire thing will actually make your skin crawl. In 2007, Oren Peli made Paranormal Activity, a film about a couple who experience strange things in their new home. Naturally, they decide to try and solve the supernatural mystery by setting up cameras throughout the house. What they find is beyond creepy, and things only get worse the more they try and document the source of their misery.
I feel it breathing on me.
Paranormal Activity is one of those horror films that leaves most of its terror to the unknown. Lights go on and off in the background, doors move, and the sheets are pulled by an invisible force. All of this goes on, mostly unbeknownst to the film's main characters, so watching it happen, while waiting to see if it wakes them up, turns into an exercise of how long you can really hold your breath. The ending is also one of the better final scares any horror film has had in decades. Whether it be through gore, shock value, or the regular creep factor, the point that most found footage horror films try to make is that somewhere there is something that is absolutely terrifying, and you should be very, very afraid. Trollhunter isn't really like that. The 2010 Norwegian film is scary, yes, but it's also incredibly funny, and it's chock full of giant killer trolls. Andre Overdahl created a film that stays true to its roots and folklore, set in a very modern world steeped in cynicism. When a group of film students discover the government has been hiding the existence of trolls along the Norwegian countryside, they take it upon themselves to document the creatures. Visually, Trollhunter looks modern and well-produced, but the film is 90% improvisation, so what you see on the screen is done mostly on the fly. It all works though, and the movie winds up being one of the most entertaining found footage films in recent years. VHS is an okay movie. The 2010 found footage horror anthology had some originality in it and a few scares, but it fell into the category of mostly forgettable 2000s horror. A year later, VHS 2 came out, and while most sequels tend to be far worse than the original, this sequel happens to be one of those rare finds that surpasses its predecessor in nearly every way. That doesn't mean VHS 2 is without its flaws. Not every one of its 5 horror stories is a winner, but the ratio of those that are makes the film worth your time. The biggest standout is Safe Haven by Timo Chianto and Gareth Evans. The former wrote and directed The Night Comes For Us, while the latter wrote and directed The Raid 2 and The Raid Redemption. Safe Haven delves into death cults, demonic worship, and zombies, making it not only one of the most well-rounded horror stories of the bunch, but one of the creepiest as well. Deborah Logan suffers from an aggressive form of Alzheimer's. In order to save their home from being repossessed, her daughter Sarah convinces Deborah to allow a documentary crew to film her as part of an Alzheimer's study.
We're gonna have fun, right?
Yeah, man.
Okay, good.
The further along they get into their study, however, the more obvious it becomes that Deborah may be suffering from something that isn't at all based in science. While the premise may not be anything new or especially progressive, the taking of Deborah Logan's draw isn't its plot. This particular possession story is less about rituals and sacrifice and more about watching Deborah slowly devolve into something not quite human in the most nightmarish ways. Lead actress Jill Larson definitely carries the film, but it also benefits from its truly creepy visuals throughout that make the taking of Deborah Logan a worthwhile horror experience. In 2013, real-life best friends Derek Lee and Cliff Prowse set out to reinvigorate the found footage horror genre with their feature film debut, Afflicted. The film follows a semi-fictional version of the pair as they embark on a one-year journey around the world, but are stopped short when a one-night stand transforms Lee into something unimaginable. The duo told Collider that their goal with Afflicted was to focus on the story and to allow the found footage aspect of the movie to work only in their budgetary favor. Lee explains, "This was a character-driven, heartfelt, but still fun and technically possible film that we could shoot for less than $1 million. Afflicted winds up being just that, a character-driven horror film about the morality of becoming something other than human. It's well shot and the effects stand up even in spite of its meager budget. More than anything though, the film works not by using cheap jump scares, but by focusing on the story itself, as well as the relationship between the two best friends who are trapped in a foreign land. There's something especially creepy about the idea of a psycho lurking around on Craigslist. That's the premise for 2014's Creep, which stars Mark Duplass as Joseph, a man who claims to be dying and wants to create a video series for his unborn son. He hires Aaron to film, and things get really, really weird.
All right, buddy. Welcome to your first tuppy.
Creep explores our need to be polite in social situations and how that need can come at the price of our own safety. Joseph seems to be a kind and genuine person, but anyone can seem to be anything when there's someone you know from the internet. The film isn't gory and it doesn't over-rely on jump scares. Instead, Creep finds a way under your skin because Duplass is so incredible at playing someone who comes off as both sincere and mildly repugnant. And then there's that line that Aaron is afraid to cross. Shouldn't he hurt Joseph's feelings and leave this weirdo behind? Or should he put up with the guy's increasing creepiness? Sure, politeness has its place, but a remote cabin in the woods isn't it. House LLC takes the idea of an haunted house and mashes it into a found footage nightmare in the best way possible. The 2015 film tells the story of a Hell House, a New York City-based Halloween attraction that sets up shop at an abandoned hotel in the small town of Abaddon, New York. After 15 attendees and nearly the entire crew are found dead the morning after opening night, a series of tapes lays out the truth of what actually happened inside. Although the film suffers a bit from a story that we've seen a million times before, House LLC finds a way to scare its audience, and it's through some pretty clever placement. Throughout the house, monsters come in and out of frame, but not in an outright jump in front of the camera sort of way. Instead, they tend to hide in the shadows, barely visible for a moment or two before they disappear completely. It's nerve-wracking trying to keep track of them, and it's exactly that feeling that makes the movie a successful horror flick. The Conspiracy, a 2012 horror film that definitely isn't real, feels like it could totally be real. That's the thing about conspiracy movies though. You're left questioning everything you've just seen, even if all of it is made up for the sake of terrifying an audience. This conspiracy theory movie involves two documentary filmmakers, Aaron and Jim, who set out to learn about their favorite local conspiracy theorist, Terrence. When Terrence suddenly goes missing, the pair are drawn into the mystery of the Tarsus Club, an ancient cult comprised of world leaders that's been behind every major event throughout history.
This got the ball rolling. All of Terrence's dates refer to specific meetings of the Tarsus Club, all of which take place right before major world events.
The conspiracy works in part because the theories it's built upon are actually floating around out there. The shadow society that controls the world is a thing people really believe in, so the film carries a sense of possibility. The movie isn't quite a documentary, but we also wouldn't be surprised if it turned out to actually be one. Half supernatural mystery, half ghost story, 2008's Lake Mungo is a gripping tale of death, grief, and secret lives. Utilizing the tried and true, based on a true story horror hook, this found footage film tells the story of Alice Palmer, a 16-year-old who drowns near her family's home and then returns to haunt them. Things aren't at all the way they seem, and the truth of Alice's life may have been a bigger mystery than her death. In spite of its catchy marketing ploy, Lake Mungo is a much better movie than The Average Haunter. It's most successful in its portrayal of Alice's family, who came across as legitimate and authentic, a real family in the midst of the grieving process. There's always the question in the back of the mind regarding the film's validity. Is it a true story? Of course not, but it doesn't make its ending any easier to digest. When Daniel Merrick and Eduardo Sanchez went into the Blair Witch Project, they had no idea it would wind up having the sort of impact it did. The directors told Bloody Disgusting in 2014 that their biggest hope for the film was that it would make it to video release. In reality, it made it to Sundance, and then went on to usher in a slew of new found footage films, including a not-so-great sequel and a 2016 remake. The movie, about three filmmakers who go in search of a legendary witch and find more than they bargained for, turned out to be one of the most original and critically acclaimed movies in this genre. But it came at a cost. Merrick and Sanchez gave their actors little to no information going into the experience, and over the course of the Blair Witch Project's filming schedule, they slowly deprived them of food and sleep.
I understand we have to go, believe me. I know
it is hard for all of us to hold it together. We need to get out of here in one piece, and this is not helping.
Merrick told Bloody Disgusting. Heather Donahue thought she may have signed up for a snuff film. That fear comes through in film, making this one of the few found footage films to genuinely feel like it was edited together from real found footage. But perhaps the most successful thing about the film is its ambiguity. It's really just a trio of campers in the woods, hearing noises and coming across weird ritualistic totems. The witch is never seen, and the ending is a little confusing. But sometimes, the best films are the ones that keep us guessing.